ID. Oh, we are recording.
Oh, I added that, sorry.
That's all good. Thank you for doing that. And so ASCE serves as a leading advocate for infrastructure. As part of this advocacy, every 4 years since 1998, ASCE has prepared a comprehensive assessment of the nation's infrastructure categories in its infrastructure report card. Using a simple and familiar, we're all familiar with the A through F school report card format. So the report card examines the current infrastructure conditions, needs, and using those, we assign grades and make recommendations. So my name is Ruwanka Purasinga. I'm the current ASCE Metro LA branch president. I'll be doing this presentation with Luis.
And so I am Luis Molina, current government affairs chair for ASCE MLab.
Cool, thanks. And then so Luis and I will be tag teaming this. We'll be sharing the findings of the 2021 infrastructure report card. So let me see, sorry, I got a few screens up. So the report card is prepared by the ASCE Committee on America's Infrastructure, which for this report card includes 32 civil engineers from around the country with expertise across 17 different categories. With ASCE staff, the committee evaluates relevant data and reports from government agencies, the private sector, nonprofits, and other organizations, and meets with technical and industry experts to gain a wider view of the nation's infrastructure. The committee then examines each category in the context of 8 key criteria before determining a grade. And so as you can see on the screen, those criteria include capacity. So when you think of capacity, you can think, does the infrastructure's capacity meet the current and future demands as population grows and with innovation and such like that. Condition, what is the infrastructure's existing and near future physical condition? With funding, what is the current level of funding from all levels of government, so there's state, local, federal, and then as compared to the funding need. So how much funding are we getting? How much is the actual need? Which leads to future need as what is the cost to improve the infrastructure? Will future funding prospects address the need? Operation and maintenance, what are the owner's ability to operate and maintain the infrastructure properly? Public safety, so to what extent is the public safety jeopardized by the conditions of the current infrastructure, and what could be the consequences of failure? Which leads into resiliency. So what is the infrastructure's capability to prevent or protect against significant multi-hazard threats and incidents? How are we able to quickly recover and reconstitute critical services with minimum consequences for public safety, health, the economy, and national security? And lastly, innovation. So what new and innovative techniques, materials, technologies, delivery methods are being implemented to improve the infrastructure? So those are the categories that we use. And they're given grades. And each category, each infrastructure actually has the grade. So to help illustrate what each letter grade means, ASCE has descriptions that classify each grade. And A is exceptional, fit for the future, in excellent condition. B is good, adequate for now, but some elements show signs of general deterioration that require attention. A C is mediocre, requires attention. Some elements exhibit significant deficiencies with increasing vulnerability. And a D is poor, at risk, elements approaching the end of their service life. Condition and capacity, are a serious concern with a strong risk of failure. And then F, we all know what F is. You're failing. It's critical. It's unfit for its purpose, with signs of imminent failure. So once the 17 categories are graded, those grades are then averaged just as on a school report card to determine an overall grade for the nation. The committee also makes recommendations to raise the grades for the nation's infrastructure generally and in each of the 17 categories. In the nearly quarter century that ASCE has been releasing the report card, Unfortunately, there have been only marginal changes because of the inaction at the federal level and the backlog of needs, which Luis will actually cover later in this presentation. So the 2021 report card, it just came out a few months ago. And for the first time ever, the report card grade total GPA, it's in a C minus. This GPA, this grade improved slightly from a D plus in 2017. So it indicates that we made some progress around the margin in some infrastructure areas. But when you look at this, there's still 11 categories in the D range. So that's, again, that's mediocre. We said at risk. So that's still alarming. We don't want to C minus while we're moving in the right direction. We still have a lot of work to do. And so I'm going to go into, and something important to note is you can note that there's one grade that went down, and that's bridges. And I think we can talk about that later, but there may be some events throughout the last year or two that you can remember involving bridges. All right, so before we go into each specific category, I wanted to quickly cover a few trends and takeaways from the new grades. So first, there's a maintenance backlog that continues to be a major issue. Sectors like transit and wastewater have staggering maintenance deficits, but they're developing a clear picture on where the available funding is most needed and where it can improve the overall system performance and public safety. Secondly, federal investments have moved the needle, and many states and local governments are also doing their part. In certain areas, including inland waterways, ports, and drinking water, the federal government has meaningfully increased investment. We're seeing results. In other words, investments are working. States and local governments and their voters are choosing to invest with bipartisan support. 37 states have raised their gas tax to fund critical transportation investments since 2010. And 98% of local infrastructure ballot initiatives passed in November 2020, which is amazing, like numbers, like 98% of infrastructure ballots like passed. That's really good to hear. I think people are understanding that. And finally, we are still hampered in some areas by lack of data. Sectors like schools, levees, and stormwater still suffer from a lack of robust condition information or inventory of assets. To target investments and allocate funding, routine, reliable data needs to be collected, aggregated, and reported. So some takeaways. We'll get into the specific topics here. So roads. So while the significant, which is a D, roads are a D, while the significance of roads in our daily life is self-evident, the network is frequently underfunded. Over 40% of the system is in poor or mediocre condition, which costs Americans about $1,000 every year in wasted time and fuel. And I believe Luis will be covering the failure to act later in this presentation, which will give a little bit more details on those numbers. And also an interesting fact is 36,000 people are dying on the nation's roads every year. And the number of pedestrian fatalities has been on the rise. And you can tie this into lack of appropriate infrastructure. Bridges, again, that was the grade that went down from 2017's report card. So 42% of all bridges are at least 50 years old with an average age of 44 years. 178 million trips are taken across structurally deficient bridges every day. And for the first time, I believe it was in 2019, the number of bridges in fair condition exceeded the number of bridges in good condition. So that infrastructure is deteriorating and it's getting worse. And there's a lack of resources and funding to correct that growing problem. Next, we'll talk about aviation, which is a D+. So they obviously hit by COVID, but prior to the onset of COVID, the nation's airports were facing growing capacity challenges. Terminals, gates, ramps availability is basically not meeting the needs of the growing passenger base. I know I could tell you I've been on airplanes that I've had to taxi for maybe 30 minutes, or you're literally sitting on an airplane waiting for a gate to open up, or you might even be flying in the air in circles. I've had to do that. That's infrastructure. That's the airports don't have sufficient infrastructure to be as optimal as it could be. And then under the pre-COVID-19 projections, our aviation system was set to have a 10-year, 111 billion funding shortfall. I'm just going to say that again. Our aviation system was set to have a 10-year, $111 billion funding shortfall. It's huge. And that gap has likely grown significantly as passenger volumes dropped since March of last year, and they haven't recovered yet. Hopefully this summer, hopefully toward the end of the year, aviation picks up, but it's definitely been hit with funding. And then the last one on this slide is transit, which is a D-. And so an interesting fact is 45% of Americans have no access to transit. If you're familiar with the first mile, last mile terms, that's a big part of it, and why people may not want to even take transit. But meanwhile, much of the existing system is also aging, and transit agencies often lack the sufficient funds to keep their existing systems in good working order. Ridership is also declining, trend increased dramatically by COVID, obviously. Failure to address the transit revenue shortfall will only extend the ridership declines, as service cuts mean that trip delays and reliability issues are going to become more frequent. Let me go here. So drinking water is a C-, which actually I worked on this report card or this category, and it moved up from a D to a C-, which would jump 2 different levels, which is pretty good. But again, still a C-. And so, our nation's drinking water infrastructure system, it's made of 2.2 million miles of underground pipes that deliver safe, reliable water to millions of people. But that system is aging and underfunded. There's a water main break every 2 minutes, and an estimated 6 billion gallons of treated water lost each day in the US, which is enough to fill 9,000 swimming pools. However, the rate of improvement is increasing. Again, why the grade went up a little bit. It is estimated that more than 12,000 miles of water pipes were planned to be replaced by drinking water utilities across the country in 2020 alone. In 2019, about a third of all utilities also had a robust asset management program in place to develop and help prioritize their capital improvements and their operation and maintenance investments with the limited dollars that they do have. Next is wastewater, which is a D+. So there are more than 16,000 wastewater treatment plants that are currently functioning, which on average are at about 80% of their design capacity. 15% of these facilities have reached or exceeded their design capacity. Because of their urban environments that are growing, facilities will increasingly have to accommodate for larger portions of the wastewater demand. And though large-scale capital improvements have been made to systems experiencing sanitary sewer overflowers, the efforts have slowed in recent years, and COVID has played a role in that also. As many treatment plants and collection networks approach the end of their lifespans, the financial responsibilities for operation and maintenance will become more costly. Estimates indicate that utilities spent over $3 billion in 2019, or more than $18 per wastewater customer, to address the almost 4,700 miles of pipeline. And then on the last one on this slide is stormwater, which is a D. Stormwater utilities are on the rise, but there are many challenges to better managing stormwater across the country. Impervious surfaces in cities, suburbs are expanding, exacerbating the urban flooding, which results in $9 billion in damages annually. I think you'll remember, I believe it was Houston that had a severe flood event a few years ago, and that was also to a lack of proper stormwater infrastructure to collect the rainfall and the storm coming in. And many of the country's legacy stormwater systems are struggling with the high cost of retrofits needed to accommodate climate change. Federal funding, though, is up in recent years, averaging about 250 million annually, which leaves a growing annual funding gap of 8 billion just to comply with current regulations. That's just the current rules. We're expanding, we're growing. These requirements are going to get larger. And then next we have levees and dams. So for levees, it's a D. And 17 million people across the nation live or work behind a levee. If any of you are from NorCal, you might know the Sacramento Bay Delta is full of levees. And levees provide critical infrastructure systems. They are about $2.3 trillion worth of property. And they protect about 4,500 schools that collectively enroll over 2 million students. The National Levee Database contains nearly 30,000 miles of levees across the US, and current estimates identify up to 10,000 additional miles of levees outside of the US Army Corps portfolio, whose location and condition are unknown due to complex and varying local ownership. As more extreme weather events result in increased flooding, such as the 20 billion in damages caused by flooding in the Midwest during the spring of 2019, it is more important now than ever to have a complete inventory of the nation's levees and to equip communities with resources to mitigate flood risk and make necessary repairs. Now, dams is actually one of my favorite categories. I actually worked on dams earlier in my career. And there are over 90,000 dams across the country that serve many purposes. The number of these considered high hazard potential dams continues to climb. It increased to over 15,600 in 2019. And the land below the dams that's being protected is often being developed for new housing and such. Encouragingly, the number of high hazard potential dams with emergency action plans, EAPs, continue to steadily climb as well. As of 2018, 81% of dams have EAPs. Unfortunately, due to lack of investment, the Association of State Dams Safety Officials estimates the number of deficient high hazard potential dams now exceeds 2,300. Again, deficient high hazard potential dams exceeds over 2,300 in the country. So an alarming number. You all may remember Michigan. I believe it was the state of Michigan had 2 dam failures last year. And it flooded communities and did a lot of damage. And that's our infrastructure. All right, inland waterways. It was a D+. And inland waterways are a U.S. freight network. So imagine like a water highway that moves agricultural exports and relieves the strain on other transportation modes. Infrastructure includes locks, dams, and the navigation channels. The Mississippi River is a major inland waterway. So recent boost in federal investment and an increase in user fees have begun to reverse decades of declining lock and dam conditions, with unscheduled lock closures reaching a 20-year low in 2017. While this is encouraging, the system still reports a 6.8 billion backlog in construction projects. Again, 6.8 billion backlog in construction projects. And there's ongoing unplanned lock closures, totaling over 5,000 hours between 2019 and 2019. So unplanned lock closures, what is that? That means people are planning to use the Mississippi River to transport goods, and they have to close the lock, the access point, due to some sort of maintenance, some sort of issue going on. And you can imagine if you're stopping boats and it harms the industries that really rely on the waterways to get their goods to the market. Ports is actually pretty high grade. It's a B-. And the nation has more than 300 coastal and inland ports. We have the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach here locally. Ports and port tenants plan to spend $163 billion between 2021 and 2025, which is up by over $8 billion since the last 4 years. I mean, that's to increase capacity and efficiency because the maximum vessel size has doubled over the last 15 years. But that's a good amount of money that is being expected to be spent. However, there are smaller and more inland ports. I know Stockton and Sacramento are some of them that are especially challenged to maintain their infrastructure because they're often competing for federal grants that usually the bigger ones pay. And also, a port's success relies on the infrastructure outside of its gates, which is often congested or in poor condition. For example, just 9% of the portions of the roadway that connect a port to other transportation modes are in either good or very good condition, only 9%. Rail, another pretty high grade at a B. So our nation's rail network is divided into two categories. There's freight rail and passenger rail. Approximately 140,000 rail miles are operated by freight. There's class 1, class 2, class 3 railroads. And then there's Amtrak that operates about over 21,000 mile network, 70% of which is owned by other railroads, also known as host. There remains a stark difference between the challenges faced by the two rail categories, as you can imagine. While freight maintains a strong network, largely through direct shipper fees, passenger rail requires government investment, and that's been plagued by a lack of federal support. So we're seeing a decline on the passenger rail there. All right, moving on to the next category. So solid waste was a C+, and the U.S. produced approximately 268 million tons of municipal solid waste in 2017, or it's about 4.51 pounds per person per day. 53% of the waste is deposited into landfills, 25% is recycled, 10% is composted, and 13% is combusted for energy. The management system faces a growing number of challenges, though, as recycling rates are plateauing, emerging contaminants are found in legacy landfills, and global markets are changing. Hazardous waste is a D+. So there are an estimated 35 million tons of hazardous materials managed annually in the United States. We have adequate capacity for the treatment and disposal of these materials through 2044. So again, we have adequate capacity for the treatment and disposal of hazardous material only until 2044, which, depending on your opinion, could either be a long time, or a short amount of time. Legacy hazardous waste sites are managed through the EPA Superfund program, and there are approximately 1,300 Superfund sites where cleanup activities are either incomplete or not yet begun, which is basically unchanged from when we did a report card in 2017. And here we have energy at a C-, which is, I think will be an interesting topic come this summer. How we've been working under the pandemic has been digitally. We've all been connected digitally for the last year, and Americans rely on readily available and uninterrupted electricity. It's very important. Utilities are taking proactive steps to strengthen the electrical grid through resilient measures, but weather remains an increasing threat. Among 640 transmission outage events reported from 2014 to 2018, severe weather was cited as the predominant cause. And I know this summer we're probably going to get a heat wave, so it's something that I think we'll get focused on a lot this summer. Distribution infrastructure in particular struggles with reliability, with 92% of all outages occurring along these segments. With the shift from coal to renewable electricity, that transition from central to distributed energy, additional transmission and distributed infrastructure is needed to deliver electricity to the customer and the end user. All right, I think this is my last slide, Luis, just a heads up. So we have Parks and Rec, which is a D+. And parks are interesting because when you go to a national park, it has every type of infrastructure, right? It has electricity, it has drinking water, it has roadways. So parks in itself has many types of infrastructure. And not surprising, Americans visit local parks and recreational facilities more than twice a month on average per person. But despite the increased popularity, investment in parks is lagging, resulting in deteriorating bridges, trails, parking areas, drinking systems, and more. And while the National Park Service deferred maintenance backlog grew over 9% in the last decade, with more than half of their assets in need of repair, federal funding for parks is set to increase with the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, which was introduced in 2020. So schools, we have a D plus, and similarly, you can think of schools having a variety of different infrastructure, which is interesting because school facilities represent the second largest sector of public infrastructure, pending after highways, and yet there's no comprehensive national data source on K through 12 public school infrastructure. I kind of said in the beginning, there are some categories that lack data. Schools is like the biggest example. The limited data that is available indicates that 53% of public school districts report that they need to either update or replace multiple building systems, including HVAC systems. More than 1/3 of public schools have portable buildings due to capacity constraints, and 45% of these buildings are in poor or fair condition. Meanwhile, as a share of the economy, state capital funding for schools was down 31% in fiscal year 2017 compared to 2008. That is equivalent to a $20 billion cut. And with that said, I am going to pass it to Luis now.
Thank you, Rwanka. So thank you for introducing us into really what the report card is, the categories, and what really drives that. Now we're going to turn over to our actual investment gap. So based on recent analysis that have been done, we've made gains in regards to some of the infrastructure categories, but our long-term investment gap continues to grow. We're still really paying about half of what we need to be spending on infrastructure, and the total investment gap has gone from 2.1 trillion over 10 years to 2.59 trillion over 10 years. Surface transportation has remained relatively steady with a little bit of an increase in the funding gap over 10 years, which is expected as our maintenance needs remain unaddressed. When it comes to water, wastewater, and stormwater, those saw the biggest jump in needs when it comes to in comparison to the previous 2017 estimate. This is partially due to stormwater being a new category. We have a lot of systems as well that are approaching or have passed their end of service lives for a lot of the pipe networks. We do also have now a better understanding resilience, and we also have looked at data that the EPA didn't previously count. When it comes to dams, we have actually had our investment gap doubled from about 40 billion to 81 billion. And this is primarily due to more comprehensive data and inventory and assessment of what the federal funding needs are, which we didn't previously have. As Rwanka mentioned, there was the recent collapse of 2 dams in Michigan that serve as an example of really the funding needs we have to bring our dam infrastructure up to par, and also the recent issues that some of you might be aware of or might remember from Oroville Dam just not too long ago. On the bright spot would be actually the Great American Outdoors Act that was passed has actually decreased the 10-year funding gap when it comes to parks and recreation. The gap has shrunk from 102 billion to 68 billion over the last 10 years. Next slide. So failing to close this infrastructure investment gap brings us some serious consequences that affect each and every American household. According to ASCE's latest economic study, Failure to Act, which focuses on the effects of not investing in our infrastructure. If we don't address the infrastructure investment gap, our economy will lose $10 trillion in GDP, which is about half of the US GDP in 2019. We'll lose more than $23 trillion in total output, primarily through loss in business sales, more than 3 million jobs in 2039, which would be twice the number of Walmart employees within the United States, and more than $3,000 in a family's annual disposable income each year from 2020 to 2039, which is about half of the average American family's monthly expenditures. And those come from things like hitting potholes and needing repairs, to time lost due to transportation problems or power outages, water main breaks. All these lead to financial loss, not just for the systems themselves, but for the people who rely on those systems. So what do we do to protect our economy and address the growing investment gap? Next slide. So ASCE urges bold leadership and action, sustained and consistent investment, and a focus on reliance to raise the national infrastructure grade over the next 4 years, so that every American family, community, and business can really thrive. Next slide. Smart investment is only possible with strong leadership and action and a clear vision for our nation's infrastructure. We really need leaders from all levels of government, businesses, labor, and other nonprofit organizations to come together. A lot of it is importance to make sure we have detailed data on our assets, and we need to incentivize asset management and encourage the creation of data sets across all types of infrastructure. We need to streamline project permitting across infrastructure sectors, but still ensure that we are keeping the appropriate safeguards and protections in place so that we're not cutting corners. We need to ensure that all investments are spent wisely, prioritizing projects that provide really critical benefits to our community, to our public safety, to our environment, and to everyone's quality of life. We really need to explore and leverage proven and emerging technology to make sure that we take good advantage of our limited resources. We need to consider life cycle costs when making project decisions. The life cycle cost analysis determines the cost of a building, its operating and maintenance, and for the infrastructure for its entire lifespan. We need research and development of innovative materials, technologies, and processes that will help us modernize and extend the life of infrastructure, make repairs or replacements, and promote cost savings. We also need to promote sustainability, or what they call the triple bottom line in infrastructure decisions, making sure that we're considering the long-term economic, social, and environmental benefits of a project. Next slide. If the United States is serious about achieving an infrastructure system fit for our country and fit for the future, there are some specific steps that must be taken, beginning with increased long-term and consistent investment to close the $2.59 trillion 10-year investment gap, meet our future need, and restore our global competitive advantage. We must increase investment from all levels of government and the private sector from 2.5% to 3.5% of the US GDP by 2025. This investment must be consistently and wisely allocated and must begin with a couple of the following steps. We need Congress to fully fund the currently authorized programs. And for those of you who might not fully understand that, the way spending works in Congress is a program is authorized and then a program is funded. Those are actually two different aspects where it's kind of like you're authorizing that this project will be done, but then you separately allocate money for it. So just because a project is authorized by Congress doesn't mean it actually has funding. We need infrastructure owners and operators to take charge, and Americans must be willing to pay rates reflecting the true cost of using, maintaining, and improving infrastructure. Our surface transportation investment gap is the largest deficit of the categories ASCE examines. Continuing to defer maintenance and modernization is impacting our ability to compete in the global marketplace and maintain a high quality of living. Congress must really fix the Highway Trust Fund. All parties should strive to close the rural, urban, and underserved community resource divide by ensuring we are adequately investing in these areas through programmatic set-asides. And all parties should make use of public-private partnerships where appropriate, where they can bring better outcomes and faster outcomes when it comes to bringing our infrastructure up to grade. Next slide. We must utilize new approaches, materials, and technologies to ensure our infrastructure can withstand and quickly recover from natural and man-made hazards. Advancements in resilience across all infrastructure sectors can be made by a couple of different ways. Enabling communities, regardless of size, to develop and institute their own resilient pathway for all their infrastructure portfolios by streamlining asset management, implementing lifecycle cost analysis into routine planning processes, and integrating climate change projections into long-term goal setting and capital improvement plans. We need to incentivize and enforce the use of codes and standards, which can mitigate risks of major climate or man-made events such as hurricanes, fires, sea level rise, and more. We need to understand that our infrastructure system is a system of systems and encourage a dynamic, big picture perspective that weighs trade-offs across infrastructure sectors while keeping resiliency as the main goal. Prioritizing projects that improve safety and security and systems and communities to ensure continued reliability and enhanced resilience. We also need to improve the land use planning across all levels of decision making to make sure we're striking a well balance between the built and natural environments while maintaining community needs now and into the future. Some of that has to do with making sure we're not encouraging too much development in flood zones and fire zones in areas we know where there is a high risk and where development might not be the best idea. And we also need to enhance the resilience of various infrastructure sectors by including or enhancing our natural or green infrastructure. Next slide. So unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has made some of the infrastructure revenue situations worse, with a large portion of our existing infrastructure systems supported by user-generated revenue streams. With the onset of the pandemic, commercial water use is down, commuters are staying off the roads and away from transit. Airports for a while were virtually empty. And while state and local budgets are really buckling under the unprecedented demands of that pandemic has brought upon them, that means there's now less support available for parks, schools, and other publicly and locally owned infrastructure. Really at a time where we need to be investing more to avoid the problem just getting away from us. Congress really should make infrastructure investment a centerpiece of its long-term economic recovery strategy. So right now is really the time to renew, modernize, and incentive and invest in our infrastructure to make sure we're maintaining our competitiveness as a nation. And we have made progress. I know as of right now, there is currently an infrastructure bill being put together in Congress with just today revamped credits for renewable energy production and transportation passing the US Senate Finance Committee. And we have made some progress, for example, here in Los Angeles and California as a whole over the last couple of years, with recently measures being passed, such as Measure M for transportation, Measure W that was also passed a couple years ago that really invests in drinking water. And these are just some examples of the types of measures that need to be passed to raise the grade. And the general public really does understand that we have work to do. As Rowanka mentioned earlier, 98% of infrastructure related ballot initiatives passed last year. So while there is a lot of need, we are making some progress. Next slide. So we have the 5 category grades, which have been increasing and have bumped up our overall grade to a C-. And that really shows that change is possible. But as previously mentioned, we still have 11 categories in the D range. So a large investment gap and high profile infrastructure failings really show that there is much more work needing to be done. You can learn more about all the different infrastructure categories by visiting the full report card at infrastructurereportcard.org, which we actually will kind of briefly look at and explore in a couple minutes. The website offers you also a portal where you can write to your lawmakers and urge them to prioritize infrastructure legislation. Make sure you're being vocal and holding your elected leaders accountable. And that's really the best way to make sure that our nation's infrastructure needs are addressed. So thank you for being here today and taking the time to allow us to share the report card with you and really show what we need to do when it comes to our infrastructure and for your interest in the backbone of our economy and daily lives. We all really share a role in renewing our nation's infrastructure. Increased interest and recent federal action has boosted our GPA to a C-, but there is really a lot more that we need to do to ensure we have infrastructure ready for the future. We can't afford to keep kicking the bucket down the road. ASCE looks forward to working with everyone to make sure that we continue making infrastructure a priority across the state, federal, and local level. And we'll be happy to take any questions at the end. Right now, I'll go ahead and share a map with you that was recently released, actually. Let's see, share screen.
Yeah, Luis, I think you can. Cool.
So, can everybody see my screen? Does that work?
Yep.
So this is a map that was recently released and was created by NBC based off data from the Federal Highway Administration. And just to kind of point out, since our bridge grade did actually drop, this really shows you the amount of infrastructure we have when it comes to bridges that is really not up to par. All the red dots you see are areas that are bridges that are in poor condition, with the lighter blue ones being fair and gray being good conditions. So fair and poor really do outnumber the good condition infrastructure and bridges, with over time poor actually increasing. And we actually don't have too many in the poor category in our area in LA, but they do exist. So this is a website we'll be sending out in the chat. And if you want to explore maybe some of the areas that you frequent, areas you drive by, just to see different areas that either have a bridge that's either good, fair, or poor. We do see up in Silmar along the 5, there's a bridge that's in poor condition. Same thing over here down towards Sun Valley. Out in the mountains towards the west side of the county, there's also some infrastructure that definitely needs work. And then if you do, so we'll send this link out so you guys can explore if you feel like exploring it. This over here is actually the infrastructure report card website. So here you can explore, there's a lot more data and fact sheets in regards to the infrastructure grade of our nation. They go into a lot more detail about the grades. You can view previous grades, uh, go by categories. Some states also have their own infrastructure report card, so you can find the infrastructure report card for California on their website as well. So that'll take you there, and it'll show how we actually have the grade matching our national grade. Our bridges are a little bit better than the national grade, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And so I'll go ahead and share both of these links in the chat.
Cool, thanks, Luis. I guess we'll open up. I want to say Q&A, but I feel like everyone here can have like a discussion type thing. I see Gina, I think your hand is up. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I have a couple of questions. One has to do with the bridges in California. Is that because when Luis was talking about the resilience, he stressed codes and standards, and in California, obviously, we have earthquakes and stuff. So do we have better codes and standards that have resulted that we have a lower, quote unquote, safer bridges or more, maintained bridges? That's my first question. Yeah.
So there's two parts to that. One is I want to say yes, because of the seismic stuff, but we also have Amit here who I know turned his camera on because he got excited. He works with bridges for Caltrans, or he used to. So I actually want to let Amit answer that one.
Hi, Gina. That's a very good question, actually. I think California has always been like in the forefront of technological advancements related to infrastructure transportation, especially because we are seismically active. And I think since 1971 earthquake, then like 1994 and 1989 earthquakes, they have taught us a lot. So that's why Caltrans especially had undertaken a lot of seismic retrofit programs after 1971 and after 1994 earthquakes. So that's why you can see that the grades for the bridges are much more higher than other structures, because we have been periodically retrofitting and replacing the bridges. I mean, there are still a lot of bridges which are which don't meet current standards and criteria, which need to be retrofitted or replaced. But I think we are still doing much better than the rest of the states.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm gonna have to bring Amit with me to all these presentations.
The second question, thank you so much, Amit. The second question is, at the beginning, the first slide of the presentation showed the 8 criteria, right? Capacity, condition, funding, future needs, da, da, da. Now, one thing that we see most public agencies right now, they're opening a new division, right? The social justice division, or social and environmental justice division. And I believe that this is why, yes, ASCE, and it's about civil and design, but public agencies are seeing themselves and grading themselves and people's expectations of them as well. You're not just developing a CIP program, not just because we need the building or we need the street, it's also where you're building it and how you're prioritizing your project. So this is the first, I've known of this report, obviously it's not the first time I, engage in it, but I feel like there should be a number 9 that needs to show up in the future reports, which is the social justice. Are public agencies making an effort to prioritize where they spend their money?
So I could tell you, so I was one of the 32 people on the national committee that made the report card, and this topic came up. As you can imagine, the last year, social and a very hot topic. Exactly how you described it. Our utilities, our infrastructure, is it serving our most vulnerable communities? Are we fairly providing infrastructure to all our communities? And we had lengthy discussions about it. And I could tell you, the idea was to keep it, almost, I hate to say technical, but keep it related on the concrete stats, right? The info that's there as engineers, what is the actual infrastructure data? But I promise you this topic will keep coming up, and I I wouldn't be surprised in 4 years if that's a part of the grade.
If I may add, like the private firms are not going to be excused in their environmental disclosures by lack of data. They have to figure out what metric and how are we going to measure it, and how are they going to ask their suppliers to figure out what data it is, right? Because they have to include it in their environmental disclosures, and yeah, so it's a challenging thing to define the metric and figure out how to do it, right? And it's probably going to take also a lot of geospatial, I don't know, a big effort, definitely a big layer of effort.
It sounds like a great research project.
Definitely.
And that's definitely a kind of part.
I can tell you another condition. Luis, go for it.
That's also part of like where we really need our leaders at all levels to really just take a stance and do the strong leadership and do that decisive action to make sure that we're not only investing in certain communities and excluding others. So that's definitely a point of conversation that is critical, and it needs to be taking everyone's perspective into account.
Yeah, and Gina, so that would be maybe category 9. I actually even suggested another category, which was cybersecurity. I think the next decade, we're going to see cybersecurity and how it ties into our infrastructure, exponentially how important that is. And it's, from how people can take control of a water system, let's say, through, remotely, things like that. Are utilities prepared with cybersecurity? I think that's another category that needs to be added.
We have 9 and 10. I volunteer for the 9 task force.
Yeah, cybersecurity, perfect example is that pipeline that was out of commission for a week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gina, was that all your questions?
Yes,
you might have one more. Okay. Thank you for asking. They're really good questions. Does anyone else have any questions? Any comments? Anything they want to share?
Suggestions?
I think. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Dina.
Oh, all right. Thanks, Chris. Thank you guys for presenting. It was great. Really detailed. So I'm curious. I know, Luis, you had mentioned about through the website for the report card, we can share with our politicians. I'm curious if you guys have any other recommendations on how to effectively let our local, whatever level politicians know about this, besides that one you already mentioned.
One recommendation I would make is, since a lot of it's probably happened a little bit less right now during the pandemic, but a lot of representatives will, when they're back in their district, have town halls or have some sort of public meetings, attend events. So those are great places where if you're there, if you want them to attend, you can really get to speak with them, and you can actually might be able to get a minute with them to speak with them in person, because they do get a lot of communication a lot of times, and it can be difficult to get a hold of somebody. But I think that is a good way to really try to get in contact with somebody.
And I'll add to that, Luis, that was a perfect segue, because that's exactly what I was going to mention. I live in the city of Alhambra, and I attended our Alhambra town hall meeting that we did. And they did a survey of all the folks. What is a priority to everyone? They did a survey and they shared the results at the town hall. It was a virtual one. And the number one thing was infrastructure. And I was just I was in the audience. I was just oh, I got to say something now. And I actually put in a question, because I was infrastructure showed up at number 1 on your survey. But I've been a lifelong resident of Alhambra, and I do not know anything about our infrastructure, and there's not a lot of transparency on where we're at. And the mayor responded and was we're going to put together a task force to see if they can put together a document and share it with all the residents. And I've been in contact with the mayor because of that. So what Luis said is 100% accurate. Go to a town hall meeting, to your local, where you live. Neighborhood council meeting, council district meeting, whatever it is. And ask about it. Ask about how is our infrastructure doing. You can be like, hey, ASCE gave us a C-. Like, you guys know about this? Or like, what are we doing? Like, or, you know, Luis showed the map with the bridges. Like if you live, I think, Luis, one's in Sylmar and one's in,
There was one in Sylmar, one towards like North Hollywood-ish.
Yeah.
There's several out towards the Santa Monica Mountains.
Yeah. It's like, if you live in there, like, you know, that's quite like, hey, why is this bridge like severely deficient and why are we not doing anything about it? But I think
Like
elected
this
officials,
is like on your
Yeah.
route to work or whatever. You're like, I crossed this bridge, like
Yeah.
putting myself at risk just to get to work.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a good way of just like being more active in your local community, because you know it can grow. That's just a mayor, but you can be talking to a congressman or congresswoman. You can be talking to a state senator, and that can be, you know, from a national level to a state level to a local level have impacts. Hopefully, we answered your question, Dana. Chris, I think you were trying to say something earlier.
Yeah, I guess a similar kind of vein about how best to get involved, how people can get involved at various levels, and just kind of getting what are the best resources to kind of learn about what things are on the docket at various levels of government, whether it's at the local or at the national level. Kind of where can people get a little bit more information on those things?
So that's going to vary depending on what level you're looking at. Some smaller cities, it is a little bit difficult, but law does require that they disclose what is going to be on the agenda at their city council meetings. Larger cities will have a lot more of that information easily available online. And as you go up, there's obviously the websites for your state legislators and for the Congress. Like they all have the data on there for what's up for vote. It can be a little hard to navigate. I do know ASCE has a ASCE Smart Brief that they send out if you want to register for that. They send out a lot of news articles, covering various topics. Sometimes it's infrastructure, congressional bill related. Sometimes it's just news. So that's some of the different ways you can really learn more about what's going on. But when it comes to your local level, which is where a lot of the times that's where you can really make that impact, because they're representing you directly and there's less representatives, really paying attention to what's going on at these council meetings is important and helpful.
And Chris, I put 2 links in the chat. One of them is a state legislative tracking thing that ASCE actually has on their website. So you can find out, you know, latest infrastructure and professional practice policies, but you know, state by state. So that's a good tool. And then I don't know if everyone knows about the Key Contact program that ASCE has. Basically, you are part of ASCE's, I want to say grassroots approach of contacting your elected officials about important infrastructure measures. So ASCE will actually let you know what, you know, policy or what bill or stuff is being discussed, and they'll encourage you to, you know, fill out. It's pretty easy. You fill it out, and it'll basically email or contact your elected official about it. It's a cool way of, you know, learning about it and being involved. So that's a good way too. I just noticed we have a question in the chat from A. Rook. Sorry, I missed that earlier. Speaking of bridges, what are your thoughts on the impact that the I-40 interstate bridge closure over the Mississippi River in Memphis that shut down and needs repairs? I'm actually not familiar with this. I'm gonna Google it right now. Luis, do you know about it?
I had heard about it, like just in passing. I know that it was something related to during inspection, they realized something had ruptured on the bridge. And
yeah, I think
really stresses the
one of the
importance of inspections, of regular inspections of our infrastructure. Or, I mean, I
Oh,
think.
wow, it's pretty bad, actually. I'm looking at Googled it.
Yeah.
Amit, do you know about it?
I have heard about it, but I did not follow up on this one. Like, I think like one of the members, I mean, of the bridge kind of, uh, I think had ruptured, like the bottom cord of the steel, uh, like steel truss, or so that triggered the emergency repair. But I'm not sure like how it has affected the traffic and the delays which it must have caused. Um, I think that was the question, right? Like,
they sent it out at work because I'm in the same group that does all our bridge inspections, and so they're like,
nice.
this is really highlighting how important our job is. But yeah, it was like a complete crack through a main critical member of the bridge.
Yeah.
So once they discovered it, they shut down the bridge immediately. And I have no idea in terms of closure time or when they imagine it'll get back open. If it's still closed, I imagine the cost is huge, because this is a major bridge getting people from Arkansas to Tennessee. So I mean, I can only imagine that it would be just a huge financial impact on those communities. But yeah, it does highlight the importance of the national bridge inventory, where you have to routinely inspect the bridges. But yeah, I was listening to the 911 calls that the inspectors were making, and it's kind of chilling because they're trying to get police out there to shut down the bridge immediately. And so fortunately nothing collapsed, nothing bad happened.
Yes, I agree.
Fortunately, it was discovered before it became a fatal problem.
Yeah,
I think a similar thing had happened on the old Bay Bridge, like which was replaced with the new one recent in the last decade. Like a critical member had fractured. So, like, luckily, I don't think this is a fractured critical member, or it would have resulted in the immediate collapse of the bridge. So I think they must be devising a plan to repair it. I know in California, like Caltrans goes out and inspects all the bridges once in every 2 years. And since I work for dams right now, like we go and inspect all the dams in California once a year. Like we go and check them. So like going and inspecting these critical infrastructures is extremely important. And I think that's how we can prevent like major catastrophic events in the future.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up in the chat. I didn't even know about that. Is there anything else anyone wants to? I know we're past our 7 o'clock time. I do want to thank everyone for joining. Oh, Gina, I see your hand up. I don't know if you had a.
Yeah, I just had a, I don't know if this is the right form, but I feel like because someone asked about, how can you get more informed and stuff. I'm actually very active in LA, but I reside in San Diego, so I'm active in both areas. And I'm the president of the board of the Arab American Association of Engineers and Architects, right? And we have our events and activities. And the next event we have on June 17th, I would like to invite you all, is going to have like Hassan Ikhwara from Sandag, who was who was the general manager of SCAG before coming to Sandag, right, the LA region. And he's going to talk about their 2021 regional plan and the inclusion of social justice and how they're doing it differently and all this. They've done amazing studies in prioritizing their infrastructure and asset management system and stuff. And it's going to we're going to have Adel Haj Khalil, who's the general manager of Streets LA, Bureau of Street Services, right? So Adel is the vice president of the board. And I don't know if you saw, so he's going to be kind of comparing and contrasting what LA is doing, what San Diego is doing, and how, the concept of one infrastructure. So that's, and I don't know if you saw Adel, there was an article in the LA Times. It's public now. He will be replacing Jeff Keitlinger at MWD. So that's also.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. So I used to intern at LA Sanitation when Adele was the assistant director.
Okay.
So I worked with Adele a few times. I didn't know about the MWD thing though. That's cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. They just had an article and they're finalizing the negotiation stuff in the LA Times. So.
That's awesome. Thank you. If there's a link to the event, if you can put it in the chat, or if you can send us an email.
I can send you an email, but I don't have your. I'll find you on
I'll
LinkedIn.
put it in the chat.
Okay.
I know. Okay, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. I know. Is our awards banquet that's the 17th? I think.
Let's see. I believe that sounds familiar.
So we might
Double
have a
check.
conflict, but is it in the evening or daytime?
No, it's noon, 11:30.
Oh, noon. So noon will
okay.
work. Yeah, our
Mhm.
event's in the evening.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you could share it, we'd be happy to share it with our members.
I will by Monday. By Monday, I'll have this stuff
Okay.
finalized. I mean, you know how it is with volunteering stuff, right? You end up doing so much, and I'm finalizing the flyer and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, we know all too well then.
Mhm. Gina, could you put me on that as well?
Yes, of course.
Appreciate it.
Oh, cool. I shall do that.
Cool. Is there any other comments or questions? Anyone want to bring up anything? If not, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. I think this is it's good for all of you all to know. So now you can do this presentation to you want to make this presentation. If you're interested in the slides and stuff, just let us know. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thank you,
evening.
guys.
Everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. It was a great presentation.